They thought their lies could stand forever. That deception, if spoken with enough confidence and repeated with enough force, could somehow replace the truth. And maybe for a time it worked. Maybe they convinced others. Maybe they even convinced themselves. But the thing about lies is they rot from the inside out. Lies are parasites. They need hosts. And the moment the truth begins to emerge, those lies start to tremble. They panic because they know they were never strong enough to last. There's something deeply unsettling about truth. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need to scream. It waits quietly, patiently, and when it finally rises, it does so with undeniable force. That's what's happening now. Their fabrications, their distortions, their smirking manipulations, they're falling apart piece by piece. Because truth isn't just information. It's a structure. It's a foundation. And the moment reality begins to reassert itself, the whole fragile tower of deceit begins to collapse. You must understand this. People lie because they are afraid of consequence, afraid of accountability, afraid of facing what they've done and who they've become. So they construct an alternate story, a version of reality where they're the victim or the hero, but never the villain. And the tragedy is, for a time, that version gets traction. It picks up sympathy. It garners protection, but only for a time. Because eventually the cracks show. Lies, unlike truth, require constant maintenance. They're exhausting to uphold. You need to remember what you said to who. You need to constantly cover your tracks. And if even one thread is pulled, if even one person begins to ask the right question, the whole thing begins to unravel. That's what's happening now. The truth is out, and they know it. Their voice is shaking. Their stories are inconsistent. Their eyes can't meet yours anymore. They're nervous, jumpy, defensive. That's not confidence. That's panic. Because deep down they know what they did. They know what they said. They know the pain they caused and the reality they tried to bury. And more than anything, they know it's catching up to them. People like that, those who build their identity on falsehood, live in fear of exposure. They lie not just to others, but to themselves. They convince themselves that they had no choice, that it wasn't their fault, that you were the problem. But now they're being forced to confront something they never prepared for. Evidence, clarity, truth. And that truth doesn't care how clever their stories were. It doesn't care how many people they fooled. It stands quietly and firmly, undoing every thread of their deception. And you, after all the confusion, all the gaslighting, all the nights spent questioning your reality, can finally breathe because the fog is lifting. You see now that it wasn't you. It never was. You weren't crazy. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't imagining things. You were in the presence of liars, and now their stories are imploding. But don't gloat. Don't celebrate too quickly. That moment will come. But first, stay grounded. The exposure of truth is not just a reckoning for them. It's an opportunity for you. An opportunity to reclaim your voice, to trust your intuition again, to rebuild what they tried to shatter in you, your sense of what's real. Because once someone lies to you deeply and persistently, it doesn't just make you angry, it destabilizes your entire sense of certainty. That's what they were counting on. They thought if they could make you doubt yourself, they could keep control. But what they didn't count on was your strength, your persistence, your refusal to betray your own perception, even when it cost you. That was the seed of their undoing, because you didn't stop, you didn't back down, you held the line, and that line, the one that separated illusion from reality, has now become a wall they can't climb. They are scrambling now, making excuses, revising their story, trying to shift blame. It's almost pathetic to watch. Because when someone has spent so long invested in a lie, the truth becomes terrifying. It threatens their self-image. It threatens their control. And in some cases, it threatens their entire identity. But let them scramble, let them panic. That is not your burden anymore. Your task now is to rise, to live in truth without apology, to walk forward knowing that you were never the liar, you were never the manipulator, you were the one seeking clarity while others played games in the dark. And when the truth finally shone, it was you who stood tall, not because you wanted revenge, but because you earned your peace. That's the most powerful thing of all. Not revenge, not retribution, but peace. And they'll never know that peace, not as long as they're enslaved to lies. Because while you're building, healing, and moving forward, they're trapped in the rubble of their own falsehoods, terrified of what comes next. The truth is out. The panic has begun. Let it. The storm they created is now turning on them. And you walk through it unshaken because you never needed lies to protect you. All you ever needed was the truth. And now it's on your side. They believed that if they lied with enough confidence, the truth would disappear. That if they masked their intentions with a charming smile and laced their words with manipulation, they could rewrite reality itself. But reality doesn't play by those rules. It may allow deception to thrive momentarily. It may even step aside as falsehoods parade around dressed as truth. But eventually, reality returns. And when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. It corrects everything. Lies, no matter how clever, are inherently unstable. They may sound polished and convincing, they may draw applause or gain sympathy, but beneath the surface they are built on nothing, and because of that, they cannot withstand pressure. One question, one moment of clarity is all it takes to begin their collapse. That's the nature of lies. They demand constant defense. A single slip and everything falls apart. When someone lies, they're not just telling a false story, they're constructing a world that doesn't exist. Every false word is a brick. Every manipulated emotion, a beam. And they build this illusion not for your benefit, but for theirs. Because deep down, they are terrified of what the truth says about them. They are terrified of being seen. So they create a mask, a character, and they perform, sometimes for days, sometimes for years, but always with fear in their hearts, fear of exposure. That fear grows over time because the longer the lie lives, the more fragile it becomes. The more it must be reinforced, defended, modified, spun. And the more energy it takes to keep that illusion alive, it begins to eat away at the liar because lies are not static. They decay. They demand more lies to stay upright. And at some point, the liar begins to lose track of what they said, to whom, and when. That's when the collapse begins. You might not see it at first. They'll get louder, more defensive. They'll accuse others. They'll try to distract from inconsistencies, but the cracks will widen. And the truth, which waited patiently in the background, will begin to seep through those cracks like light through broken glass. You don't need to fight for it. You don't need to chase it. Truth arrives on its own terms, and when it comes, it sweeps away everything that was built on falsehood. This is the law of reality. You can't outrun it forever. You can't fake your way into peace. You can't manipulate your way into integrity. Those things are earned, not fabricated. And the moment someone tries to construct an identity or a narrative rooted in lies, they sign a contract with decay. They may get by for a while, but their time is limited because what they've built is hollow. It's ironic, really. The people who lie often think they're being strategic. They think they're winning. They see truth as a weakness and deception as a weapon. But what they don't understand is that lies are a time bomb. They tick quietly in the background, unnoticed. But they are always counting down. And when they go off, when the truth explodes into view, it's not just their story that shatters. It's their credibility, their relationships, their legacy. The most dangerous part, some of them actually start to believe their own lies. And that makes the fall even harder because when reality finally asserts itself, they have no tools to deal with it. They've built their entire self-perception on a distortion. And the moment that distortion is corrected, they're left exposed, unprepared, and disoriented. That's the price of living outside the truth. You lose your connection to what's real. And when that disconnection finally breaks down, it's devastating. But here's the good news. The truth always wins. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to shout. It simply exists. It's grounded. It's stable. And eventually, it reveals itself. In your life, you've probably seen this firsthand. Someone lied about you, tried to twist the facts, tried to damage your name, and maybe for a time they succeeded. Maybe others believed them. Maybe you started to doubt yourself. That's the most painful part. When lies become so loud, you start questioning your own reality. But despite all of that, something in you held on. That thread of truth, no matter how frayed, didn't break. You kept walking. You stayed silent when necessary. You didn't retaliate with equal deception. You let the truth do its work. And now you're watching the inevitable unfold. Their lies are crumbling. Their stories no longer make sense. People are starting to notice. Inconsistencies are surfacing. And the liar, they're growing desperate, defensive, panicked, because the structure they built was never strong to begin with. There's immense satisfaction in that moment. Not the satisfaction of vengeance, but the satisfaction of validation, of knowing you were right to stand in truth, that you didn't need to manipulate reality to win, that your integrity was the silent power working in your favor all along. And let this be a lesson going forward. Never envy the person who appears to win through deceit. Their victory is temporary. Their world is fragile. Instead, build slowly. Build honestly. Let truth guide your words, your actions, your relationships, because while lies may shine brightly for a moment, they always burn out. But truth is fireproof. It endures, it rebuilds, and in the end, it always stands. You can tell a lot about a person not just by what they say, but by how they react when the truth begins to surface. When someone is guilty, truly guilty of lying, of betrayal, of twisting reality, they don't remain calm when the truth starts to rise. No, they panic. And their panic is not just a reaction, it's a revelation. It's their confession without words. There's a certain unraveling that begins when a liar senses exposure. It doesn't happen all at once. At first, it's subtle. They get defensive over small things. They become reactive to neutral questions. They change the subject when the topic gets too close to the truth. Their confidence starts to slip, and in its place, fear begins to show, because they know, whether consciously or buried deep in the back of their mind, they know they've built something that can't withstand scrutiny. The most telling sign is inconsistency. One day they say one thing, the next they say another. They forget the details of their own story. They begin to stumble through their narratives, fumbling facts, tripping over timelines, scrambling to hold together a version of reality that was never real to begin with. And what you're witnessing in those moments is more than just dishonesty. It's a person caught in their own web. When you confront someone with the truth, or when the truth begins to emerge on its own, they can't help but show their hand. A person who's innocent doesn't panic. They may be hurt or shocked or even angry, but they remain grounded. There's a steadiness in them. But the liar, the deceiver, they panic because they know the truth will cost them everything. Their image, their control, their manipulative influence over others. That's what they fear most. Not the truth itself, but what it exposes about them. Watch their body language. Their hands shake. Their voice changes pitch. Their eyes dart, avoiding contact. They start talking too much, or not at all. This isn't coincidence. It's the body betraying what the mind is trying to hide. And you've seen it. You've seen someone who once held power over you begin to lose their grip the moment truth walked in the room. That's not just poetic. That's justice in real time. And what do they do next? They deflect, they point fingers, they spin new lies to patch the holes in the old ones. They try to turn the conversation around, make it about your tone, your timing, your reaction, anything to keep the focus off the truth. Because if the spotlight stays on what's real, they're finished. They know it. And that fear becomes a kind of madness, a desperation that poisons everything they do. Some of them will even play the victim. It's their final card. When all else fails, they will cry foul. They'll claim they're being unfairly attacked. They'll say they're misunderstood. They'll accuse you of cruelty, even as their entire facade is falling apart. And the sad part is, some people will believe them. because panic can look a lot like sincerity. But to the discerning eye, to the person who has seen the whole picture, there's no confusion. Their panic is not rooted in innocence, it's the terror of being known. You see, truth doesn't need to scream. It doesn't need to argue. It just needs to show up. And the moment it does, it begins to break apart every lie that's been told in its absence. That's why they're so afraid, because they've lived in the dark so long that the light is blinding. It's not that the truth is loud. It's that their lies were never strong enough to endure its presence. And now they're crumbling. You see it in their contradictions. You hear it in their rushed explanations. You feel it in the way their energy shifts. No longer dominant, no longer in control, but cornered like an animal backed against a wall. And in that moment, you don't even need to prove anything. Their behavior is the proof. This is why you must stay calm. Let them panic. Let them spiral. You don't need to shout, accuse, or match their energy. Your silence, your composure, is a mirror. It reflects everything they are trying to escape, and the more you hold to the truth, the more their falsehoods suffocate them. That's what accountability looks like. Not always a courtroom or a public apology, but a collapse, a personal, undeniable collapse under the pressure of truth they thought would never come. And remember this, the panic you're witnessing isn't just fear of being exposed to others, it's fear of being exposed to themselves. Because in the end, the biggest lie they told wasn't to you, it was to themselves. They told themselves they could get away with it, that they were smarter, that they deserved to control the narrative. But now, as everything unravels, they're left face to face with the truth they ran from, and that truth is merciless. You were never crazy. You were never the problem. You simply saw what they hoped you wouldn't. And now you're watching the panic unfold, not because you wanted revenge, but because truth, by its very nature, brings everything hidden into the light. Let their panic be the soundtrack to your peace. Let their unraveling be the confirmation that you were always standing on solid ground, and walk forward, not with vengeance, but with clarity. Because when the truth comes out, those who built their lives on lies don't just fall, they disintegrate. Not because you pushed them, but because they were never standing on anything real to begin with. One of the most devastating things someone can do to you is not just lie to others about who you are, but to lie to you about who you are. They make you question your motives, your intentions, your memories. They twist your words, distort your actions, and manipulate your emotions until you begin to wonder if you're the one at fault. That is the weapon of the deceiver. Not just to betray you, but to make you feel like you're betraying yourself. And so you sit in confusion. You replay conversations. You doubt your reactions. You overanalyze your behavior. You wonder, was I too much? Did I misread that? Am I the problem here? This is not weakness. It's the natural response of someone who is emotionally intelligent, who takes responsibility seriously, who cares about truth and fairness. But that strength, your self-awareness, is exactly what they exploit. They use your desire to understand and turn it into a prison. They wanted you to believe you were unstable, insecure, oversensitive, not because you are, but because if you start believing those things, you become easier to control. And control was the point. It always was. They needed you to surrender your perception so they could replace it with their narrative. One in which they are always justified, always the victim, and you somehow are always to blame. But here's the truth. You were never the problem. Your ability to sense that something was off, that was your sanity, not your instability. Your discomfort in their presence wasn't a flaw. It was a signal, a warning that your nervous system was trying to send you long before your conscious mind could make sense of it. Yet you were responding to emotional dishonesty, to gaslighting, to the subtle erosion of your truth. And now that the truth is out, you can finally see it clearly, how masterfully they manipulated the situation, how they sowed doubt, how they told stories that made themselves look righteous while casting you as the unstable one. But it never sat right with you, did it? Something in you kept tugging at the thread even when others told you to let it go, even when you tried to silence your own doubts. That inner voice, that small, quiet knowing, it was right. It was always right. When you begin to see the full picture, There's grief. Grief over the time you spent blaming yourself, over the way you twisted yourself into knots trying to accommodate someone who never intended to understand you. There's pain in realizing that while you were being honest and vulnerable, they were calculating and cold. That while you were trying to fix, they were trying to fracture. But there's also freedom. Because now you know. Now you can stop carrying the guilt that was never yours. You can stop apologizing for your reactions to their mistreatment. You can stop explaining yourself to people who never wanted to hear the truth in the first place. The truth is they needed you to believe you were broken so they could avoid facing how broken they really are. You weren't too much. You weren't too sensitive. You were just finally reacting to the weight of their dishonesty. And that reaction was not only valid, it was necessary. Because when someone is trying to rewrite your reality, your resistance is your survival. Understand this. People who are whole, people who are rooted in truth, do not need to convince others they are right at the expense of someone else's reputation. They don't manipulate, distort, or gaslight. Those tactics are the behaviors of someone trying to defend a false image. And if they have to lie to maintain that image, then the image was never real to begin with. It was never about you. It was about their inability to take accountability. It was about their fear of being seen for who they truly are. And so they projected that fear onto you. They made you the villain in a story they created to protect their fragile ego. But now the story is falling apart, and what remains is the truth that you were standing in integrity all along. Let that truth sink in. Let it heal the parts of you that were bruised by false narratives. Let it restore your confidence in your own perception, because what they tried to destroy wasn't your reputation. It was your clarity. They knew if you ever saw clearly, their game would be over, and now you do. Now you see it all. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not the villain in someone else's delusion. You are someone who survived psychological manipulation, emotional warfare, and character assassination, and still managed to hold on to your core. That takes strength. That takes courage, and it's time to honor that. From this point forward, you walk differently. You stop apologizing for truths that made others uncomfortable. You stop minimizing your intuition to protect someone else's illusion. You no longer shrink yourself to fit into narratives that were never meant for you. You reclaim your voice, not because you need to prove anything, but because it was never lost. It was only buried beneath the weight of their lies. The truth has set you free. And while they may continue to panic, to scramble, to rewrite history, you don't have to follow them into that chaos. You've outgrown it. You've risen above it. And most importantly, you've come home to the one thing they tried to steal, your sense of self. You were never the problem. You were the truth, standing in the middle of someone else's deception. And now that the deception is collapsing, your clarity is your power. Your calm is your justice, and your truth, it's indestructible. When everything around you felt like it was falling apart, when lies were spreading, when your name was being smeared, when people you trusted turned away, there was one thing you didn't let go of, the truth. You held the line. You didn't retaliate with deception. You didn't try to beat them at their own game. You didn't lower yourself to their level, no matter how tempting it was to fight fire with fire. And that decision, that discipline, is what began their unraveling. Because nothing threatens a liar more than someone who refuses to abandon the truth. That strength, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't seek revenge, but just stands quietly and unshaken, that's not weakness. That's power, a deep internal power that cannot be faked or stolen. It's the power of character, and it comes with a cost. Because holding the line doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like isolation. It looks like crying behind closed doors. It looks like staying silent when lies about you are echoing louder than your own voice. But you did it anyway. You endured the misunderstanding. You bore the weight of false accusations, and you didn't let it turn you into someone you're not. They underestimated that. They thought you'd break. They thought you'd lash out, explode, destroy yourself in anger so they could point the finger and say, see, that's who they really are. But you didn't. You restrained yourself, not because you were weak, but because you knew what was at stake. You knew that truth has a strange way of coming back around, and when it does, those who remained grounded will be the ones still standing. There's something profoundly threatening about integrity. It's quiet, but it confronts falsehood just by existing. Your refusal to play their game began to expose them. While they twisted stories, you stayed consistent. While they sought sympathy through manipulation, you relied on reality, and people noticed, even if it took them time. Because truth is not flashy. It doesn't need applause, but it does have weight, and eventually that weight begins to shift the entire room. Your strength wasn't in how loudly you defended yourself, it was in how completely you refused to become what they accused you of being. That kind of moral clarity, that inner alignment, it's rare, and it makes people uncomfortable, especially those who are performing, because their image depends on illusion. Yours doesn't. You didn't need people to believe you to know who you were. You didn't need validation to maintain your identity, and that frightened them. They threw everything at you, rumors, distortions, character attacks, not because you were weak, but because you were strong. They were hoping to break your composure, because if they could break that, they could say you were unstable, irrational, untrustworthy. But you didn't give them that satisfaction. You remained calm. You chose truth over theatrics. And that choice has echoed far louder than any lie they told. And now the truth is out. The line you held so steadily is the line that drew the boundary between fact and fiction. You didn't have to scream. You didn't have to beg people to see it. The truth revealed itself in time. And when it did, it confirmed everything you knew deep down. It wasn't you. It never was. You were in the middle of something much darker, something rooted in fear, insecurity, and deceit, and you didn't let it shape you. They're falling apart now, not because you attacked, but because the mask they wore is slipping. The consistency you showed is unraveling their contradictions. The stillness you maintained is exposing their chaos. The honesty you clung to is dismantling the lie they lived in. You didn't win by fighting, you won by enduring, and that's the part they'll never understand. Because for someone to lie like that, to deceive with such effort, they have to believe that control is more important than truth, but you didn't want control. You wanted clarity. You wanted peace. You wanted to be left alone to live honestly, without manipulation or pretense, and that made you dangerous to them, because people like you, who won't play along, are the biggest threat to those whose power depends on deception. It takes a different kind of strength to walk away from a fight and let time do its work. It takes faith in truth, trust in reality, and patience in the process. And you had all three. That's why their strategy backfired. That's why their lies couldn't hold. Because you held the line, not with vengeance, not with ego, but with integrity. And here's the beautiful part. While they now scramble to maintain the illusion, you are free. Free from the anxiety of pretending. Free from the guilt they tried to place on your shoulders. Free from the emotional warfare that was once your daily reality. You didn't just survive, you transcended. You walked through the fire and didn't let it burn away your soul. Let that be your legacy. Not the noise they created, but the silence you kept. Not the damage they tried to do, but the dignity you maintained. Because in a world that often rewards the loudest voice, you proved that the most powerful weapon is quiet truth. And while they were busy spinning stories, you were living one, authentic, difficult, unglamorous, but real. So if you ever doubt yourself again, remember this. You held the line when it mattered most. You stayed true in the face of distortion. And that unshakable resolve, it didn't just protect you, it exposed them. It turned the tide. And in the end, it gave the truth the room it needed to speak. Not just for you, but through you. And that is something no lie can ever silence. There is a kind of peace that only comes after chaos. A silence that arrives not because everything was explained or made right, but because the truth finally settled where it belonged. You see, while they were lying, manipulating, and trying to rewrite the story, you were walking through fire. You were living with the weight of what they did, the confusion, the betrayal, the injustice, and yet, despite all of it, you never resorted to the same games they played, that restraint, that dignity. It didn't feel like power at the time, but now it's clear that was your strength, and it's what separated you from them. They are not at peace. Don't be fooled by the smiles, the confident posts, the curated images they present to the world. It's a performance. Inside, they are unraveling, because when someone builds their life on a lie, they can never truly rest. They always have to watch their back, always have to remember who they told what, always afraid of being exposed. That's not peace, that's prison. They might not show it openly, but that's because liars are excellent actors. They pretend to be unfazed, but their eyes are tired. Their mind is restless. Their conscience, though buried, is not dead. And the truth, your truth, is haunting them now. You, on the other hand, are beginning to feel something they never will: real freedom. Not just from them, but from the version of yourself that once felt the need to prove anything to people who never saw you clearly. You've outgrown the pain. You've stepped beyond the illusion, and in that space there is clarity, a kind of internal silence where you don't need to fight, argue, or justify. You know what happened, you know who you are, and that knowing, that deep, unshakable knowing, that's peace. They will never have that, not as long as they continue to run from the truth. Because peace is not something you can fake. It doesn't come from pretending everything is fine. It comes from facing what's real, even when it hurts. And they're not ready to do that. They're too busy covering their tracks, managing appearances, trying to keep control. But that control is slipping, slowly, quietly, inevitably, because the truth is no longer working for them, it's working against them. And it shows in their defensiveness, in their anxiety, in the cracks in their stories, in the way they can't hold eye contact anymore. They feel the truth closing in, and they know what it means. It means reckoning. It means facing everything they tried to avoid. And the tragedy is, they could have chosen differently. They could have told the truth. They could have made it right, but instead they chose the lie, and now the lie is choosing their suffering. You didn't have to lift a finger. You didn't have to tear them down. Life is doing it for you, not out of revenge, but out of order, because the universe, in its own strange way, always moves toward balance. You can't sow deceit forever and not reap disorder. You can't destroy someone's reputation and expect your own to remain untouched. They are learning that now slowly, painfully, and you are healing. It's important to recognize the difference. You're not just surviving anymore. You're not just holding yourself together. You're rebuilding. You're rediscovering your strength. You're learning to trust your intuition again, to believe in your own perception, to walk with confidence, not because someone validated you, but because you validated yourself. And that's what they never wanted. They wanted you broken, silenced, doubting. Because a person who doubts themselves is easier to control. But now that you're walking in truth, you're untouchable. And here's the paradox. Your peace now feels like a threat to them. It unsettles them because it confirms what they tried so hard to deny, that they were wrong, that you were never unstable, that you were never the liar, that you were never what they made you out to be. Every time you speak calmly, live freely, or simply exist in joy, they're reminded of the truth, and the truth burns them. Not because you said it, but because it still lives in you. So let them spin, let them scramble, let them feel the consequences of their own deception. That is not cruelty, that is life correcting itself, and you don't need to gloat or seek revenge. You've already won something they can't fake: peace of mind. You can sleep without fear, you can move without guilt, you can love without shame, because you walked through betrayal and still chose not to become bitter. That is power, that is grace. They wanted you bitter so they could call you cruel. They wanted you broken so they could say you were unstable, but you gave them nothing. You just kept healing. You kept growing. You kept becoming, and that is what haunts them the most, not your anger, but your freedom. You see, truth doesn't just expose others, it transforms you. It gives you back everything they tried to take. Your voice, your confidence, your clarity. And once you taste that kind of wholeness, you stop chasing people who are running from themselves. You stop trying to explain your worth to those committed to misunderstanding you. You let them go, not with bitterness, but with finality. So walk forward. Let the silence speak for you. Let your peace be the evidence. Let your life be the rebuttal to every lie they ever told. You don't need to correct them. The truth already is. And the more they panic, the more it proves what you always knew. You never needed to lie. You never needed to retaliate. You just needed to survive.